Can everyone hear me? Yeah, I can hear myself. All right, it's hard to see past the first row. I was joking with the gentleman in front. He's going to get all my questions today because he's the only one I can see. But we're going to try and keep this informal. And, you know, if you have questions, shout at me. Oh, way better. That lighting went down, so way easier to see you guys now. Thank you for coming. Presentation today is going to be, from detection to prevention, building a resilient zero-trust endpoint strategy. To start off, I'm going to ask you a question. It's a rhetorical question. I don't need answers to it right away, but we'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. And the question I like to ask when I start this presentation is, if you were going to develop your endpoint strategy today, would you do it the same way as what you have in production today, right? So think about that. I see some people going, probably not, I don't know. We'll talk about some of the reasons why you may change your mind. You may not. It's not a, everyone, not a solution that fits every single person out there and every single use case, but certainly addresses some of the challenges that we're seeing out there. So let's jump into it. Let's talk a bit about what the current endpoint risk is out there today. So you've probably seen this stat or heard a variation of this stat. As much as 90% of successful cyber attacks are coming from the endpoint. And out of those 90% that are attempted, 70% are successful, right? You've probably seen some variation of that somewhere. This is from the IBM study. And I get asked this all the time. People say, Daniel, last year, the number of ransomware attacks pretty much leveled out. It was between 4 to 8%, depending on which analyst you believe or you're dealing with at the time. So the number of ransomware attacks did not really increase significantly last year, and that's absolutely a true statement. What did happen, however, is the bad guys got better. For virtually the same number of attacks last year, there was a 312% increase in the number of endpoints affected by the same number of attacks, right? So that's telling us the bad guys are getting better at doing what they're doing, and they're doing that via the Microsoft Windows endpoint, all right? So 66% of organizations today have had a breach, the ones that have reported. We're dealing with a few dozen right now that are private companies and have not reported breaches, but this number is underrepresented. So what we look at, or what this says, it's not a matter of if you're going to be breached at some point from an endpoint, it's a matter of when that's going to happen, right? So you need to prepare for that. We have many customers that have DR strategies, business continuity strategies. They can flip over their data center. I was dealing with one of our national banks just 2 weeks ago. They can flip over their data center in 20 minutes with only a 5-minute loss in data, which is huge. It's a monumental effort. What's interesting about that, though, in the discussion with them, is BCP, or business continuity planning, seems to be very, very focused on the data center. What we're not seeing is people addressing the endpoint, right? So in this case, they had an issue. It wasn't malware. It's just a known product out there. Some of us may have seen it. July last year, starts with a C. It took a bunch of people offline. And their remediation for that particular incident on the endpoint was, we'll just have our constituents bring their own machines. A, not everybody has a laptop nowadays. B, I don't think I'd want anyone's laptop on my network, thank you very much. Not just anybody's, especially if it was my kid's. She spends her night gaming and God knows what's on that machine at this point. But that was their actual BCP solution for the endpoint. They had everything covered in the data center, but the BCP solution for the endpoint was our employees will bring their own, right? So their rationale was that their BCP for the endpoint was they move people to AVD, So they'll have virtualized desktops that are non-persistent. So should they get compromised, a restart, and they're back to normal. And that's great, but from a support perspective, you're supporting Chromebooks, you're supporting print from home, you're supporting MacBooks, et cetera, all kinds of issues around that on how you support that. Certain function keys that don't work, that they needed to work for some of their applications, et cetera. It was a gong show when they started testing this. So they're looking at IGEL for remediating that when they have an instance that calls for either a malware attack or something that's non-malicious, like CrowdStrike last year, for example, or the recent Microsoft issue that we have. So 66% of companies are hit by ransomware. The majority don't have a BCP solution for the endpoint, and they're taking the traditional model of monitor, detect, remediate to secure their endpoint. The issue with that, again, is when you look at that, the majority of attacks are happening on the Windows side, and I'll give you an instance of a customer we're working with on the East Coast where their solution was to keep laptops off network. I hear this all the time as well from customers. So they don't keep them on network. They have someone with a USB stick run around image devices separately. They stay off the network so they can't be compromised. Payloads can't be loaded. And that was their BCP solution for endpoints. It was costing them 40 hours per month per department to just update these. They had identified 600 of these key individuals in their company that would get one of these laptops. They would come into the office if their device was ransomwared, and they would pick up that laptop. It's always, the comedy of errors that basically work out to give them a problem. So here's what happened. They would hire an intern in IT to run around with that USB stick and update those devices. He walks in, this was just after COVID, walks into a department, he's got 60 devices. The update takes about 2.5 hours to do per device, and he's thinking, there's no way I'm spending the next week and a half updating all these machines. I will network connect them, put the ISO on the network, and update all the machines at once. Great idea. Unfortunately, when they forensically went back and figured out what happened, they had been compromised about 90 days earlier. So as soon as he network connected those devices, the payloads were downloaded on that, and about 2.5 weeks after he did that, they were ransomwared. So execs ran into the office, pick up their laptops. No one tests it at the office, of course. Drive back home, open the machine, and it's ransomware, right? So it's to illustrate that, again, that Microsoft, no matter what you're trying to do, can, with the various plans you put in place, there's still the possibility of getting ransomware. And what we're saying is shift that from a sort of monitor, detect, remediate kind of approach to a preventative security, a zero trust approach, where the attack vector, instead of that standard sort of monitor, detect, remediate, you take a security first approach. So in comes IGEL. We're working with them. We have been for about a year now. They're using us for the BCP, business continuity planning. And in their instance, IGEL's a read-only OS, can't drop any software on it, can't execute executables. There's no local data that's stored there. It supports single sign-on, MFA, et cetera. All the data's encrypted, at rest, in transit, et cetera. And it's modular design, much like your cell phone. You have an operating system and then the apps that you need. It is purpose-built for running in an environment where your desktop, your applications are cloud delivered. And by that, I mean traditional VDI, desktop as a service. We're seeing a lot of take-up on enterprise browsers like Island.io. or SaaS-based, web-based applications. The interesting stat about that is, I hear this all the time as well, is we're not ready for that yet, and that's fine. Certainly, we're seeing this shift from thick clients running locally on Windows to SaaS-based, to DAS-based apps for legacy apps, to, again, enterprise browser-type apps. The vendors are forcing you. We'll put ourselves in that category as well. Last year, Gartner report came out, 72% of net new software that's being developed out there is SaaS-based only, right? So the software vendors are pushing you that way. They don't want to deliver thick-based, client-based software anymore. And in the Gartner report, if you believe what Gartner's saying and you believe their prediction, they're saying by 2030, so in less than 5 years, virtually 100% of software will be developed as SaaS-based only, right? So the vendor community, I'll include myself in that, we're driving you there anyhow. Not everyone's ready for that, but what we're saying is where you have these business continuity plans, where you have apps that are delivered already via the web or cloud-based, will include VDI, DAS, SaaS-based apps in that. When you have that situation, why use Windows to provide Windows applications in the cloud? Windows is the single point, again, your biggest threat vector at the endpoint. We looked at the stats earlier. So what we're saying is take a preventive security approach, load IGEL on those devices, and remotely access those devices from a read-only OS. That device goes missing, gets tampered with, it shuts itself down. If it gets stolen, we send a kill pill to it. It can't be accessed. So that's where we're going. That's what we do. And then for those devices that are running Windows only today, we also have the ability to run a dual boot solution on that Windows. So should that device get compromised, should you have a CrowdStrike incident, you can flip over on the boot to the IGEL partition that's loaded on that machine and actually securely boot from IGEL, even though that machine is compromised on the Windows partition. I often get asked, well, Dan, what if the drive is pooched as well? They figure out how to do that. We have the other option, so there's two IGEL options, 3 options in total. Continue doing everything with Windows, no problem. Do 90% of your work that way. When there is a compromise, boot from IGEL secure partition. If the partition itself is affected or the drive it won't boot itself, you can also boot this from a USB key. And that's part of our BCP solution. So you have 2 options should that happen. And this particular customer that I was talking about with the kid who did the connecting the devices to the drive, they're using the USB key. And what they've done is their goal was to have a zero-call cutover for BCP solution. So they sent out a letter with 5 instructions on it. They glued the USB key to the top of the page and sent that to their key execs. They selected 50 to start. The goal was to have 50% of them do it without having to call IT. They had 100% success on that. It was really straightforward. Stick the key in, boot the device. You'll see the menu pop up, pick option 3. It boots to the IGEL USB. You're then connected. And from there, it's a standard Windows environment. So it looks just like, in their case, they're using Entra ID. You enter your Entra credentials, and you're up and running. You're connected to your AVD desktop in the cloud, and it looks just like a Windows experience. It looks and feels exactly like Windows. So very frictionless kind of experience, no support calls. Now, when we roll this out to 600, and in their case, up to 10,000 users, I'm sure there'll be a few that can't figure that out. But right now, it's been a great test. They're in the process of rolling that out enterprise-wide. And one of the reasons was they're stuck on this zero trust approach. So they wanted to have isolation from the hardware. So if you see the circle at the top, the endpoint hardware, you can buy IGEL-ready devices from Lenovo, HP, and LG today. These devices come with IGEL loaded right out of the box. So from a deployment perspective, buy the piece of equipment, it gets shipped. As soon as it gets plugged in, you can push the profile to that user, right? So pretty straightforward. We're isolating the hardware from the actual VDI, DAS, browser, et cetera, through zero trust isolation. And we also support your typical identity and access management solutions like, Imprivata, Ping, Okta, Entra ID, you name it. And along with some of the security vendors that you're seeing here today, you can load on the endpoint. If you're managing these devices with Intune, we'll provide all that information to it. But we're isolating, again, from a trust perspective, we have the hardware that's trusted. You can have conditional access. We know who the identity of the person is. And at the same time, we're running on a trusted platform for VDI, DAS, and web-based access. So again, replacing Windows at the endpoint when you're presenting the Windows desktop or applications remotely. Questions on that? I said a lot there. That was like 17 minutes. No questions? No? Pretty straightforward so far? All right. So we talked a bit about the use cases. IGEL OS, so you have some options. You can reflash any existing Windows 365 device, Windows device, x86 64-bit. We don't do any Macs or anything like that, proprietary chipset. We don't do that. We are coming out with ARM support. It should be announced in November. We are a German-based company. If you know anything about German engineering, or if you've heard the rumors, or you've seen the commercials in the past, we do not release software that doesn't work. It's not like a US model where, it's 80% good, we'll put it out in the field and we'll deal with the support calls. Our engineers have a totally different mentality. The software's got to be locked down. It does push some release dates out sometimes. As a sales guy, that can be frustrating. As a customer, that can be frustrating. But the upside is when it's pushed out, it just works. Okay, so you can reflash equipment. You can buy it right from the OEM. You can have the dual boot that I talked about earlier from a BCP perspective. You have IGEL on a secure partition running on the piece of equipment. The third option that we talked about was the USB key that can be set in there to boot from that. And we've also introduced IGEL Managed Hypervisor recently. This is for what we're seeing is mostly OT type of environments, manufacturing, healthcare, brownfield, oil and gas type applications where they've now, electricity, utilities, you name it, they've connected their operational technologies to IT. And the reason they've done that is for speed, efficiency, et cetera. But what they've done is they've exposed those operational technologies to the internet now because they're internet connected. That brings a whole set of challenges to these people because these operational technologies were never built to support the security required to doing that. So what we're seeing in manufacturing, we have some of the biggest manufacturers as clients and some of the biggest sort of brownfield oil and gas, Phillips, Conoco. I'm drawing a blank on the other one right now, Bell and Howell, you name it. There's a bunch of large customers that are integrated IGEL into operational technology to eliminate running Windows at that endpoint. So the example that comes to mind on operational technology side is, you guys may remember Maple Leaf Meats. About 2.5 years ago, they had a breach. It was all over the news. You couldn't get your favorite salami anymore in the grocery store because the plants were offline. What happened there, and this is not talking at a school, they're now an IGEL customer, and they were evaluating IGEL at the time. This is in their financial statements. You can go and look this up. From December 2024, they published the results of this and what the cost was. Anyone want to hazard a guess how much it cost Maple Leaf Meats to be offline from that one breach? From a malicious user, an upset employee walked in, was paid to take a USB key and stick it in the back of one of their operational technology tablets. Anyone want to hazard a guess how much that is? That cost? 10 million? 15 million? Just shy of 21 million bucks is what that affected. That's on their financial statements. You can go and look it up on December. So even though we see the average breach number is saying $1.8 million, It can be far more for that when it's affecting your operational technology, both from a reputational standpoint. The 21 million almost is lost reputation. People didn't renew contracts with them. They went with other suppliers. They had no choice at the time. They needed to get stuff out to market. They wanted it on the counters. The grocery stores wanted, their deli meats out there. And they lost those contracts and never got them back, right? So those kinds of issues, when you're that large a manufacturer, they're now running IGEL on those operational tablets inside their plants. And again, you can't stick a USB key in there, can't drop a payload. You can stick the key in, but it won't do anything. Can't drop a payload on it. They're 100%, and knock on wood, we haven't been penetrated. We've been around for 30 years and have never had a breach on our software. But that's the kinds of things that you're seeing from an operational technology standpoint, connecting to the internet so that IT can operationalize these systems, can do the backups, can do the updates, et cetera. That's reason why companies like VW worldwide are looking at operationalizing IGEL as part of their solution, all right? So again, what we're saying is not every user needs full Windows desktop. IGEL enables that curated work-based workspace. It's a fit-for-purpose type of approach. Not every desktop looks the same. Finance users can have their piece. Operational users can have their piece. Development IT guys can have a development approach and desktop for them. It's fit for purpose. It's all curated by our universal management suite that comes with IGEL that allows you to build these profiles for the users so that they get the applications delivered to the desktop that they require, all right? So there's a number of ways that we deliver that. VDI, DAS, we talked about quickly. Enterprise browser, we have a number of folks like Island.io in part of our program. You can develop that. You can build your own. Island.io is just built on Chromium. There's, the secret sauce for them is that they've done all the works, all the API pieces, all that for you. But you could absolutely do that yourself. We have customers that are building custom browsers, locking them down. They look like apps to their end users, but they're really just an enterprise browser that they've customized. Progressive web apps, you've probably seen these with Microsoft. Use them. I've personally been using, the Outlook PWA client since it came out, and they're deprecating Outlook, so you're going to have no choice at some point in the future. But that's the way that, again, the vendors are pushing you to these web-based apps, to the progressive web apps. You have some native apps, so we also support different applications that we have. Like you'll see Improvada on here, which is identity and access management solution we support like 90 meter for cards, things like that. Those are purpose-built apps from the vendors themselves. They're basically the Linux version of the Windows product running on our OS that has been tested and meets our security requirements before we load it on our app store. And lastly, we have the hypervisor. You can run IGEL, you can run any you can run any OS that you want inside our hypervisor. It's basically running KVM, and it's bare metal hypervisor for those of you who care to know that. And so where we're seeing this, again, is operational technology, healthcare. I was just talking to a customer at this show today where they're running point-of-sale systems that are loaded locally on the machines, and it only supports Windows 7. Windows 7 support ended, I don't know how many years ago now, I lost track. But that's the kind of things that we're seeing in our operational technology fields, brownfield examples, where if you think of healthcare, those big expensive medical equipment. I have a medical customer in this country who is still running NT for a piece of equipment that they support, okay? So there's a requirement out there, and what they're doing is they're taking that OS, running it inside of IGEL, so they have all the security, all the modular approach, encryption that they need running on that, and they're running that OS inside of IGEL, Should something happen to that, it can't be compromised, they can't stick a key in it, etc. But if somehow they did compromise that OS, a simple reboot and it's up and running again, because again, non-persistent approach is what we take. So they're securing that old technology that's no longer getting security updates, and they're running it inside an IGEL that's allowing the security be in place to secure that older OS. Right. Questions on the desktop itself and sort of what we're doing around that? No one? This is the quietest. Are we getting drinks at 5 o'clock? Is that what everyone's waiting for? All right, no problem. Yeah. Can't hear you. Mac? Mac OS? No, we don't support Mac today. Proprietary chipset, we've made a conscious decision not to do that. It's just not enough market share for Mac today. However, we do have Mac clients. I do have customers that run our stuff, and what they've done is they're using a bare metal hypervisor inside of Mac and booting it from one of our USB keys and actually running IGEL on a hypervisor inside of Mac to give them an IGEL client. I'm like, you're kidding me. That's way too much work. Doesn't make sense. That's not a good use case for us, but they're doing it. I wouldn't recommend that. Really, x86, 64-bit, and you're fine. We don't run on Raspberry Pis. I get asked that all the time. It's, that's not meant to run operational technology, but people are doing it. But we are coming out with ARM support in the near future. Yep. Different type of approach around that. We can take that offline. It's a complicated discussion. All right. I see another hand.
Yeah, one more question.
Yes.
Since the bank has its own requirements, how deep are you integrating?
So you're talking about the language requirements?
No, both language and like
And security? Yeah, absolutely. So StatsCan has been a customer of Stats Quebec has been a customer of ours for 6.5 years. We support French-Canadian language, and we even have the option which we implemented for Rogers. Rogers is if you call Rogers support today, that support person is using IGEL on their desktop, so you can ask them questions. They'll scratch their head and go, how did you know that? But we had to support that for a long time with the French language. So when the EULA's done, everything else, we support French-Canadian keyboards, everything else. That's always been there since day one, so no issue on there. And from a security perspective, we've been working with a number of the largest organizations in Quebec. So, in financial services like Intact, for example, Videotron has our stuff. There's CHUM is a big customer of ours. So we'll work with the security requirements, whatever space you're in, and they tend to sort of shift the bar depending what industry you're in, what their governance and requirements are. But we have yet to not meet those requirements. We'll put an NDA in place because that's sort of the secret sauce of what we do. But we connect you with our German security team, and they'll address all the security requirements, and we've yet to be denied that. And we're in some of the most secure networks in Canada. We're working in classified networks with Department of National Defense, for example, in secure bunkers today. It took us 18 months to pass their security requirements. It was quite involved. I wish they could share it, but it's classified. They can't even share it to other classified departments. That's how crazy it is, but it is what it is. We go through that step with every one of them. But I would be surprised, all that to say, I would be surprised if we couldn't meet the security requirement dealing with healthcare, dealing with the government in Quebec, et cetera. We've not run into any issues on that. Does that answer your question? Okay. 13 seconds left. Quickly, some of the economic impact is reducing that security stack that you need to manage Windows today. So what we're saying is we basically eliminate about 75% of the cost in managing Windows today. If you look at Windows, the average organization, this is a stat from Forrester, I believe, is running 6 to 12 pieces of software just to lock down Windows. right? So think of that. That's 6 to 12 different pieces of software that your staff has to be trained on that probably have a lot of overlap, trying to provide information, et cetera. It's a lot of budget, and it's a lot of operational cost on top of just managing all that. So we get rid of that stack, and you now can focus just on delivering endpoints and putting that money towards strategic IT products, right? We'll talk about the environmental impact, et cetera. Sort of key takeaway is endpoints don't have to be liabilities anymore, right? We like to say simply IGEL it. We wanted to say just IGEL it, but we were worried about getting sued by Nike, so we stayed away from that. But we like to say simply IGEL it. You know, endpoints can be hardened enablers of zero trust. When you think about that pie chart that I showed you with the 3 areas, we isolate the hardware from the desktop delivery, from the identity and access management. That's all part of zero trust, and we can create these different enclaves of users and show that they're actually secured. So we can actually tie these to your zero trust requirements, and we fit, depending on who you follow, the US model, the Canadian model, the 7 pillars, the 10 pillars in Canada, we actually map to those areas, and we can show you how we operationalize those from an IGEL perspective. So, you know, I'd like to ask and finish with this question again that I started with is, if you knew what you know now and today, would you still have designed your endpoint strategy the way that you're doing it today? Really, legacy has driven us to where we are. Legacy apps, legacy desktop approach. We just know how to do Windows. It's been operationalized. What we see is status quo is the hardest thing to overcome. The budget's already set for the hardware refresh, et cetera. So that's the biggest sort of impediment to moving into this new era of preventative security as opposed to monitor, detect, remediate. All right? And that's it. I don't want to waste more of your time. I've already run over, but you know, I'm open for questions. I know I saw a lot of the faces here came by our booth today, but if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be sticking around. I'll be around. All right? All right. Thank you, everyone.